Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. And bringing your furry family members. So I like talking about skillful means and practices and stages of realization. All of that type of approach has its place. And there's some remarkable pointers available by people who have gone through this process and are able to describe it well. And there are many points of inquiry that are available that can be very potent at the right time for the right person. So I talk about this stuff, I think, a good amount, and I just kind of lay out possibilities that you can pick up and try, and sometimes find some pretty potent results. But the talk today is not about any of that. This is what I want to talk about is the way of intuition. Because we came into this world not knowing any process. We came into this world not knowing a way to be a good person, a way to be a good boy, a good girl. We didn't know any of that. We had to learn it. A way to accomplish things, a way to cause other things to happen, a way to fit in. So we learned all of that from initially our parents and then our friends and other influences. And it gets that kind of learning, which is important, of course, gets so ingrained in our identity. It gets so intertwined with our identity that when we start to wake up, we try to go back and apply that to awakening. We try to apply processes and trying to arrange things the right way, trying to be the right person so that awakening happens, or so that realization can clarify or deepen or progress. And this is so deeply embedded in our processing that it's easy to overlook how much we do this. So there's a way to, when it comes to our sense of immediacy, presence, maybe even our sense of self or I am or I or me, there's a way to disregard all of that kind of learning, all of that kind of observation of our own experience, and then trying to modulate our experience to get a result. There's a way to move in the moment with our immediate experience that doesn't require any of that. And when that initial shift that I sometimes call awakening occurs, that's what's extremely obvious to me. That's what's happening, is the person that this occurred to or occurred with is suddenly just in flow, very obviously. There's no need to do anything, no need to try to be anything. All the spiritual stuff is just, to them, often is like not necessary to talk about. Their intuitive sense of reality is so clear for a period of time, they just feel enlightened. Like to me, it's so spontaneous, and their trust in themselves and in life is so seamless that it just still always surprises me, even though I've seen it happen so many times. I'm still always amazed by it. That they suddenly just completely trust intuition, not anything they've learned about how to be, how to succeed, um, where to put their attention, how to become more present, how to get into the now. Like none of that's happening. It's just fidelity with the natural intuition, with the natural impulses of reality. That person and reality to me don't feel like two things at all. It's very natural. And then after that initial movement of awakening, or maybe people who have had a taste of that, or maybe people who've had an awakening and things have even clarified beyond that. Still, what it ends up being is a movement to reclaim that natural spontaneity in all aspects of life, that not natural intuition in all aspects of life. Maybe you could call it every minute Zen. Because we know, I think anyone who's listening to this, anyone who has any interest in this subject already has some intuition that this is possible. But when we wake up, it's not just clear that it's possible, it's clear that that's the most real reality there could be. Far more real than any imagined reality. Far more real than the reflected reality inside of the mind, reflected in thoughts and then further distorted by a thought reflecting another thought, and on and on. So there's a very clear knowing that yes, this spontaneity, this complete trust in life, to where we don't have to reflect on ourselves anymore, because it's just so much enjoyment and immersion, complete aliveness, spontaneity. Whatever comes is not just okay, it's profoundly enjoyable, whether it's what previously would have embarrassed us or caused us to self-reflect and go into our mind. Now suddenly whatever those events are, whatever those conditions are just more freedom. They're more opening, inward and outward. So you could almost call this the way of intuition. It's deeply peaceful. Excuse me. It doesn't require anything to maintain it at all. And of course, it's not a stage. It's not a state. It's not a it's not a paradigm of identity. It doesn't have anything to do with identity. You could say you're free from the need to sort out identity. In Zen, there's a phrase sometimes used like, this is about solving the problem of birth and death. But it's real freedom. It's true freedom when you don't need to solve the problem anymore. Not because you have a solution necessarily, but because the impulse to solve it is gone completely. To the point where whatever comes, whether it's life or death, whether it's a beginning or an end, nothing recoils from that. And assesses what it's going to do about it. That doesn't have to happen anymore. It just doesn't happen. You could say that all problems, including the spiritual problems, are reflections in consciousness of this fundamental mistrust in our deepest intuition. And so the whole issue can be sorted out at that, right at the root. By looking, feeling in to the root of identity, the root of what makes me, me. And it sorts itself out. If we're willing to go there in an unguarded way to that root, which is here. This isn't something that's going to happen later. It sorts itself out. It knows how to sort itself out. It's right at the edge of life and death. It's at the borderline of being and non-being. The seeming borderline between those two. Between absolute helplessness and control. There's a point or a singularity we can touch into. We can explore this directly in the sense of I am, if that's what's there. Just follow it all the way down. Follow it all the way down to wherever it goes. The sense of I, without the I. Just conscious. What's at the root of that? We can follow it in. Follow our intuition in. We can also follow it in the senses. In a sound, in a single sound. We can find where that sound, the radiance of the sound, let's say, the texture of the sound, the soundness of the sound. Where does that meet no sound? Your mind can't answer this. If it tries, it's just a distraction. It's like a clown trying to get your attention. But reality knows the answer to this. So where does that sound right now? The ambient sound. Where does it meet the place where no sound is ever touched? This place I'm talking about is not a place. It's not an arrival. It's not a destination. But it's here. It's available always. And by touching into that, even though it makes no sense, we can't file it away in the archives of experience. It's not like that. It's too real. But by touching into it for a moment with genuine curiosity, the only way you can walk through this gate is completely unguarded. If you have you carry ideas with you, the gate closes. It doesn't really close, but you make an image of the gate, and then you get back in your mind. So just let the image go and just walk right through. Come in contact with the place where sound meets no sound. In the body, same thing. Wherever our attention moves in the body, it might be predominantly in the chest for someone at a certain time in their life or in their practice. It might be predominantly in the head. It might be a contraction. It might be a density behind the eyes and the forehead. If there's a lot of fear, anxiety, panic even, it might be in the throat. If we're heart-based, it might be more in the chest. But there's no rules to any of this, so don't try to analyze that. I'm just making these examples that, and sometimes it's in the gut, it's deep in the gut. And we can inquire in those spaces, in those anchors that we have, anchoring sensation in what seems like a body here. We can be willing just to go right to the core of that sensation and ask, where does this sensation meet no sensation? Just follow it through, follow it along, let go. This is, you don't have to maintain this. It's not something to struggle with. It's a query. It's a reattunement to intuition. It might feel really subtle. It might feel even grand, maha, might feel quite alive, but none of those matter. Those qualifications don't matter. What matters is the intention to step back from all the learnings, from all the ways we've learned to be somebody, a good person, a brother, a sister, a lover, a parent, a son, a spiritual person, somebody who's had an awakening, somebody who's not had an awakening, somebody who understands spirituality, someone who doesn't. All these learnings, all these cloaks we've acquired, not cloaks, but these veils or these identities. So we can just let those be. Don't do anything with them and just be willing to move past. Right into the sense, sound, the body sense, sensation. And be willing to let the body go as you move into that sensation. Because is it inside? Is it outside? Is it one point in space? Or is it all points in space? Does it have nothing to do with space? It's too close to talk about space here. This is where surrender occurs. This is where intuition will lead you if you're willing to just follow it down and then let go of everything you learned to attach to your identity over time. Again and again and again. Letting go, letting go, letting go. Plunging right into the unknown. When we do this, we can stop saying no to experience. We don't have to throw out experience. We don't have to categorize experience. We don't have to judge experience. This becomes pure experience without a subject experiencing an object, just experience. With no experiencer, no rules, no parameters, We don't need to know where that sound came from. We don't need to know where it's going. We let it be what it is, and we learn now to let ourselves be what we are right now. We let experience be exactly what it is. Phenomenon. Here. Just this. We don't add from it and we don't subtract from it. A watcher state, a manager of experience is just a thought. And that thought is similarly alive, non-dual, not two, not somewhere else, not here. Not inside, not outside. None of those qualifiers describe this. One thought, one movement of consciousness is just what it is. We don't need to add to it. We don't need to subtract from it. We don't need to hold back from it. It's just movement, stillness, and movement. We don't need to divide it, dissect it, understand it. It's just this. Pure aliveness. The responsiveness of this field is immediate. So sensation is immediately responsive to a sound. Immediate meaning no time between the sensations in the body and the sounds, one and the same. In a dance, the apparent movement creates an experience. The apparent two-ness creates an experience. And we can experience both sides at once. We can experience consciousness or thought at the same time as we experience sensation. Can be in the head, can be elsewhere. We need to differentiate those senses. So this way of intuition is always here. Even when we feel like a doer, we feel like a practicer, applying practices, applying effort to practice, to inquire to become more present, more relaxed through meditation, all of those movements are perfectly okay. They're not incompatible with the way of intuition. The way of intuition isn't threatened by anything because it's always available. It's always here. So we can find it in every practice. We can find it when we stumble, when we get in our heads and our minds, when there's thoughts. This intuitive path is still there. Never leaves you. Never apart from you. You know, the intimacy we crave, the interconnectedness we might crave sometimes if we feel like it's not as clear as it was at another moment. It's never gone anywhere. When we're imagining it, when we're putting it in the future, when we're saying, I'm going to find that later, it's right there already. It's simply the attention is looking into a mirror, a distorting mirror of consciousness. And it's saying, oh, this intimacy. And it reflects and it says, oh, it must be over there. But you're already experiencing it. You can't know it. You can't posit it in the future or past, the non-existent future or past, unless you already know it. It's always here. So when we struggle, it's okay. Just it is the struggle. Let struggle be struggle. When we're thinking, let thinking be thinking. That's where the struggle ends. Suffering ends when we stop trying to end suffering. And our mind would jump up and say, well, no, I don't want to let go of the, belief that something better can come later, this freedom can come later. Because if I let go of that, then I'll miss it somehow. I'll miss out. So that's where emotion work can be helpful, right? You have to, if you can't feel it, you have to identify it, or you can identify that emotion of fear. Wow, is it possible that all of these identity structures are based on doubt and fear of some sort, of some level? May not be abject fear, may not be terror, but some sense of a fear of life. And so now we have an opportunity to find this this intuition, to find it right in the experience of fear or avoidance or aversion. There are people who say, I don't feel emotions, but they have some realization and so forth. And that's fine. It's a lot of this is about interpretation. But if there's no aversion and there's no desire, that's enlightenment. So as long as there's any sense of aversion, I would call that fear at some level. Avoidance, which isn't bad. When you see it, and you can at least acknowledge it, then we can come in contact with it. When we don't acknowledge it, when we're completely closed to the idea that it exists, that's when we're divided. That's when we miss something. That's when we keep searching for that wholeness, the every minute Zen. Because even avoidance is part of reality. Even avoidance is Buddha nature. Samsara is nirvana, so avoidance, aversion are also completeness. They're also wholeness. We don't become enlightened and stand apart. That'll never happen. If we can't acknowledge an emotion, how are we going to recognize that person standing right in front of us fully? How can we acknowledge them fully without any experience of emotion? That's the beauty of it. When we open every door, or willing to open every door, we find nothing but more wholeness, Buddha nature, presence in every single movement. The ones we've avoided for so long that we've convinced ourselves they're not even part of us anymore. It's still there. The intuition will take you into these places if you really let go of all your knowledge, all your accumulated spiritual experiences, because they're all going. We're all going to the same place as bodies in this lifetime. All that we've learned, all that we've gathered, all the knowledge, all the spiritual insights, they're going to disintegrate with this body in the grave. Of course. That's what Ramana Maharishi did when he was 15 and his father died and he had an existential crisis, or I assume he did. And he laid down and he went through death. He went through rigor mortis experientially with his own body. Because I think he wanted to see what remained when the body died away. And that is possible to know that. It's possible to wake up to that fully. But the first step is letting go of everything. All of our identities, beliefs, fixations. At least be willing to. You can't purposely do it, really, but you can be willing to. Be willing to feel anything. Life is very intelligent. It will put you in the exact situations to untie all these dualistic knots if you're open to it. If you don't struggle against it too much. You'll struggle a little bit. We all are going to. That's how it works. Identity is about struggle. But if we're willing to relax that struggle a little bit when life shows us a situation that might open us to something that we have been filtering for a long time, we've been avoiding for a long time. When we have the opportunity to open to that, just a little willingness to let go of the usual coping mechanisms, to say, okay, what can I see here? Not a conclusion about myself necessarily, but a dissolving of a paradigm, a dissolving of a view or a frame of reference. I can feel it happening right here, and it feels like death. It feels like something's dying here, literally. That can be just a feeling, and it can reduce you to tears or body shaking sometimes. It just depends, but regardless, you'll feel something dying away. And this will happen more than once. So are you willing to just follow the intuition straight through that? Are you willing to let the body go through whatever it has to go through physically in that moment? Let go of your comforting beliefs about yourself, including where it's leading, and just go with whatever's happening here. I mean, we've all been doing this since we came into the world, right? We just learned a programmed way to think to convince ourselves we've been in control in a way that we haven't. But when it comes to the immediate physical experience of letting go of death, we have a huge opportunity. It won't feel good. It won't feel like, ooh, this is going to be enlightenment. That's not what it's going to feel like. It's not what it feels like. It feels like complete disorientation, dissolution of you. It can feel like that. So we can just find a measure of trust in those moments. Trust in life. Trust in the universe. Trust in the impulse that somehow made this body come into being, made this stuff happen. And it's an acknowledgement that it's vastly beyond my own understanding, my own will. I can't will a body into existence. I can't will a universe into existence. But here it is. So it's a trust and a surrender and maybe a faith sort of thing, sort of movement here. But it's also an admitting of my own arrogance, that I really thought I was in control of all this. And I thought I knew how this moment was supposed to be better than life knows. And I've done that day after day, year after year. I've been impatient, I've been complained, all that. It's fine. We don't have to judge ourselves for this, but acknowledge it. That all that amounts to a bunch of naive arrogance, really. And now I'm going to let go of control a little more if I can, or completely if I can. Maybe I can. In this moment, sometimes you can let go all the way. Just give the reins over to life, to the unknowable. Those are the moments where the rubber meets the road when it comes to spirituality. Sometimes you get there by exhausting yourself. This is common in like Renzai Zen. You work on a koan and drill into it and give it all of your energy and exhaust yourself again and again and again, intellectually, emotionally. And somehow at some point you literally just realize at every level, I can't do this. And then all of a sudden, all there is move. It's completely obvious. So it can happen in that way. But it can also happen with just a willingness to let go of the illusion of control. To be willing to step into wonder. The wonder of the mysterious nature of it, of phenomenon. What is sound? And then you listen. And then there's just listening, sound listening. That's your entry point. Or the visual field, the morphology of the colors and shapes. The visual snow, it's your entry point. What is this? Can I create this? Right? All the stuff we learned about it, all the knowledge we learned about what vision is, what sound is, the auditory nerve and vibrations in the air, that's all stuff we've learned, right? But when you directly experience that sound, you're in awe, if you're honest. because you can't make that happen. It's already happening. It's just happening, just this. It's coming out of nowhere. It's going into nowhere. And it's not even arising at all. That's mysterious. So how is this way of intuition, how is it compatible with practice? Like in the very traditional sense of practice, meditating, using a koan, doing self-inquiry, vipassana, where there's a sense of I'm doing this as I do it, right? How is that compatible with what I'm talking about? Well, I would say that the more you open to the experiential insights that are available with each of those ways, the more they start to look and feel exactly the same. Because to me, they're not two things. They're not two. The reason I say it as a path, the reason I describe it this way and even contrast it with intentional practice is not to give anyone the impression that it's a different path. It's not a different path. It's not even a path. The reason I do that is to undermine belief structures about what's happening when I'm sitting, what's happening when I'm meditating, what's happening when I count one breath, one out breath, one. Mu. Who am I? What's happening right there is non-dual. There's not a doer. There's not a subject and an object. 1 minute of sitting is 1 minute of being a Buddha. One event of inquiry is one moment of participation in Buddha nature. When you really pour yourself into a practice, it starts to become something like a pure practice, like a participation in purity. And you let go of whatever happened 1 minute ago. You don't worry about the fact that you lost count of your breaths for the last 5-10 minutes. That's completely gone because now there's only one. Just that. No reference point. Just that luminous truth. That is surrender. Intuition to move beyond all dualistic paradigms is right there. Another way of saying it is practice, any practice can, but it doesn't always, but it can lead to an immediate experiential insight. So if you breathe out that one time following the breath, and everything stops. Don't start it up again. Don't make another thought. There's no practice here. There's no past, there's no future, there's no practicer. Just stop. And if that's not what happens, if there are thoughts going and you get distracted into the mind and whatever, go back to the practice. Simple. The next breath. Whatever it is, whatever your practice is. But if you find yourself in a contentless place where you're not asleep, obviously, there's awareness, there's consciousness, but literally no content. That's it. Stay there. Don't exert effort. Efforts are thoughts. Thoughts are effort. Sounds don't exert effort. Sensations don't exert effort. Effort's introduced in consciousness, and then it causes a wave, and then the wave crashes back on us again and again, and we do it all day long. But if for whatever reason we're sitting, we're inquiring, or everything just stops, just stay right there. That's fine. Nowhere to go, nothing to do, nothing to realize, just that. That's grace. Let it be what it is. You'll find this natural fascination in the most subtle movements. You don't even know what they are. You're not trying to think about what anything is. Just this extreme subtlety. And an exquisite sensitivity. It's like the sensitivity knob got turned way up. And the quietude is the loudest thing in the room. This is where intuition meets practice. Meditation is meditating itself. Intuition stops here because it says exactly this. No more seeking. No avoidance here. So everything is allowed here, sounds and sensations and movements of thought. But I don't distinguish any of that. Don't have to. Everything's at rest. Nothing's pushed out. Infinite inclusion. Maximum sensitivity. No filtering, complete openness. Is there practice here? Yes and no. Is there intuition here? Yes and no. Now we can let go of those paradigms as well. There's nothing to say about this. There's no need to communicate it. Is it neutral? Yes. Is it profound? Yes. But it's not bound by those descriptors. Could this ever not be here? Of course not. Is there an I here? Is there no I here? A self, no self? Who cares? Doesn't matter. You just talk, 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 talk. Am I awake? Am I not awake? Doesn't matter. Just talk, thoughts. Do I have it right? Do I have it wrong? Just doesn't matter. Nonsense. What could be more real than this? Do we have to do anything with this? No. Do we have to maintain it? No. That's its gift. You can rest completely. Do you need permission to do this, to be here? No. It's its own permission. Anything can arise here, but nothing has to. Where is struggle here? Doesn't make sense. Never was. Never could be. Okay, I'm gonna take a break for a minute, and then if anyone has questions, we can answer. Did that land? Make any sense? Any questions?
I know there's a question I want to ask, but I'm having trouble putting it into words. It has to do with the relationship between intentionality in practice and intuitive practice that you went deeply into in the second half of the talk, how they're not really contradictory. But yeah, I really don't know how to ask what I want to ask. Almost like, So this issue of trust has always been something that I've paid a little bit closer attention when you've talked about, because I think that's a major sticking point for me. So for me, when I engage in deliberate practice, there's an element of it that is just like what you were talking about. It's engaging in a way that actually allows you to let go, engaging to let go. And then there's the other component that's engaging to not let go. And it can be so subtle which of them I'm doing, or which orientation I have.
Well, this is a kind of a nasty way to answer the question, but letting go and not letting go are like two sides of the same coin. in any way we can think about it, even subtle ways we can think about it. So in a way, you can kind of see that coin just flipping in consciousness, and recognizing that the one that feels like it has that decision to make about how to let go, how not to let go, is not apart from the belief in letting go and the belief in holding. All of those are all sort of fluctuations in consciousness. Because this is neither letting go nor holding on. It's like too close. There's nothing to let go of or hold on to. There's nothing apart that could even start to formulate that experience of the one who could let go or the one that could hold on. And also, as you were asking the question, it struck me that just the nature of thought is, I mean, this has been said to death, but it's true. It's just dualistic in nature. A thought simply just says this or that. Thoughts are all about or. It's either this or that, or this or that, and then we divide reality up based on that. But the immediate experience of the place that I'm describing, where complete surrender or complete trust meets some sort of intentionality, or let's say orientation to living truth, where those meet. It's not about or. It's not about one or the other. It's about already seeing from the place where they could never be two. And like the word trust keeps coming, because I think there's two aspects to how we develop that trust or hone it. There's one that is kind of in time, like you get better at it, like flexing a muscle. But there's another aspect of it that's just an immediate surrender. And both of those have their place. Also, acknowledging that being a smart person, being an intelligent person, you've learned to play the game of being human really well to protect yourself, right? This is everybody. I mean, we all find our way to do that. And there's something to be said for that in the relative sense, learning to navigate the world of people. Whether that means completely avoiding people, or it means engaging them in a very specific way where I'm in control, or I'm the smart one, or I find ways to, avoid situations where I feel like I'm going to be hurt or whatever, and arrange life so that there are more situations where I feel like I'm the one who's appreciated, or whatever we do. And that there's a lot of intelligence and thought behind that, because that world of being human is, in the way I'm speaking, is very conceptual. Actually, it's the ways we think about relationships and all that. It's all quite dualistic. So acknowledging that our mind actually has done a lot for us in that way. It's helped us as we were growing up from childhood in environments and situations that we had no control over, because children don't. They just learn to do their best, right? And that the mind really did help us through all of that. So it's not a, it's not a bad thing. It's not like the fact that thoughts have that dividing nature is bad. Intrinsically, it's not. It helped us through a lot of developmental stages of our lives, and it's really important for that. So again, I come to that, and like that is true. I can completely acknowledge the power of human individual intelligence and understand that it does a lot for us, even as a race, and at the very same time, that place where where no thought or concept or construct or movement of consciousness it's almost like it can't touch that place, but not because that place is somewhere off. It's not like they're distant from each other. It's just that the immediacy is so vivid. It's so alive that nothing taints it. No thought taints it. No concept taints it. I like the phrase like Christ said, being in the world but not of the world. I don't mean that as an individual experience. I mean that as this that I'm talking about is this radical aliveness that is also empty of any intrinsic nature, is not just immediately available, it's full on, no matter what seems to be going on in the mind. And it's actually so obvious that we have to exert a lot of energy to avoid it. We have to exert a lot of energy into thought to actually avoid this. And that exertion of and that movement of avoidance is what causes what we interpret as a suffering. That's what's uncomfortable. It's nothing about thought that's uncomfortable, really. It's nothing about the seeming dividing of reality, because reality knows it's not divisible. Reality doesn't experience itself as threatened by division, because there's no such thing as division. So none of that's a problem. It's that we actually have learned, and we continue to habituate our will to move back into the world of thought and try to use it for something that it's just not capable of, which is to recreate reality, to modulate reality, to control reality, to make it something it's not. It just can never happen, never will happen, never could possibly happen. So somehow just seeing like, wow, I actually exert a lot of effort into that trying to separate from life, trying to see the world as separate when it's clearly not. That energy of exertion, that's what causes suffering, because it's discordant with natural reality, you could say. Trying to perceive a past and a future all the time, trying to perceive distance where there isn't, is actually taxing to us. It feels uncomfortable. And it seems like when you see it that way, especially if you intuit that that's really how it is, it seems like it should just be able to stop, right? Like we should be able to just stop it. Why can't we just stop it? But the best I've come up with is the nervous system is genius and complex. And what it does is it basically, any neural pathways that have been repeated continue to repeat. It's like you don't have to add extra effort to keep those neural pathways going. And when the default mode network with 11 centers or whatever it has, it's like a lot of mental activity, more mental activity when we're at rest than we're engaged in a task. That's the default mode network. That network will just stay going, actually. That's how our nervous systems are wired. We don't have to make it stay going, and yet the effort is constantly introduced. That's what feels uncomfortable. So that's why practices, if done properly, are trying to kind of overcompensate for that movement and slow the thing down, or gain insights that'll calm it down enough for a moment to like see clearly.
Extremely interesting.
And then the surrender aspect is just realizing that all that default mode network creating this seemingly three-dimensional world and all that shit is actually not real at all. The world as we perceive it does not look like we perceive it, not even close. It's energy. Everything's energy, right? So the way we agree on colors and shapes and all that, that's not what the actual world looks like. It's just what this mechanism of the eyes and the retina and the brain construct, because it makes our species survive. That's it. And it's just happened over millions of years, right? So the world doesn't look anything like that. Of course it doesn't. And so the intuition part is just recognizing somehow I actually still have direct access to that non-constructed world. And that's why I always say, like, just touch into it, or just takes a moment, just that surrender of just a moment. It reminds again and again and again. So from a like a neurophysiologic standpoint, that's why practice helps. Specific practices, especially like inquiry, anything where you're investigating beliefs in a really distinct way can help, because it unties those beliefs, and when it unties those beliefs, those neural pathways calm down. And stuff with emotion work, because a lot of the thinking is actually avoidant in nature. It's avoidant of the physical experience of being alive, which is scary to the sense of separate self, because it doesn't feel like it's in control. It knows it's not in control when an emotion takes over the body, whether it's ecstasy, whether it's fear, sadness, right? All those things are threatening to the sense of intellectual self. So those kinds of practices where we can calm those pathways enough to where, again, it's all about remembering, sort of reacquiring that which we could never really have lost. And it's amazing how quickly we reattune our nervous systems to seeking and the sense of being a self in here, divided from the world, when we interact with other people who think that way, right? Which is everyone. Because it's amazing how quickly it happens, but it makes sense, because we're sensitive. Like, we're sensitive beings. We pick up the cues of other people very quickly, and we mirror their physiology. We mirror their everything, their emotion states or lack of emotion, their avoidance states. We mirror their internal processing by talking. And when we talk, what are we always talking about? Doership. We're talking about we're talking about we're either reinforcing that things shouldn't be the way they are right now, or reinforcing I have control and I'm changing what's going to happen in the future, and this is how I'm going to change it. That's the kind of stuff we talk about all the time, right? So that can just kind of reinforce those pathways. So it can be helpful that's why retreats can be really helpful, and taking time away from too much activity around other people and stuff can be helpful to remind ourselves of what's more intimate, natural, immediate, spontaneous. Any questions, other questions?
That's good stuff. That was really relevant to me too. Tyler's question and your response. I feel like this would be something that I watch a couple of times after you post it.
Angelo, you referenced the concept of the network a lot. Is there, and I think maybe you heard about that, like the relevance non-duality from Gary Weber, I'm not sure, but like, is there something you recommend to look into that more, that's not like too much in the head, it's like more directly relevant to this kind of work?
You know, I've read on it, and I actually think it's really interesting, the default mode network stuff. You can actually read about the different centers and what they do, and you'll be like, oh wow, yeah, you can see how, like, there's one center, I can't remember the name of it, but one of the centers, one of the like nucleuses or whatever, its job is to imagine how you look to the outside world. Its job is to imagine how other people see you. And you can see, like, wow, that's actually why my brain does that, because there's a little part of my brain that's purposely doing that. And then there's parts of it that have to do with time, self and time, and there's other parts of it. The gist of it is the subnetworks are self and time, right? Which obviously most of how we think is in time. And then the other one is self apart, like literally subject object. We actually have a center that makes us constantly perceive that. I like Gary Weber a lot. What's interesting is he lectures a lot about this stuff and talks about it and knows the science of it well. And yet when he did his work for awakening and so forth, he just did what Ramana Maharishi said. He said his question was, where am I? And he took a very empirical approach. He's like, I should be able to find that me, right? That it feels like I am somewhere. And so he took that approach. So his approach really was similar to most people this has worked for that have gone through this. But yeah, there's, I think, like 10 years ago or something, there were like a handful of studies on the default mode network. Now there's like thousands. So it's an exploding area of research. Like you can look at these functional MRI studies. They have really clever, elegant fMRI studies proving that you don't actually make decisions the way you think you do. Like they could actually predict the decision the person was going to make before they made it through functional MRI and looking at their brain patterns, things like that. Like they've gotten some, and these are like top tier, you know, place MIT and stuff that study this stuff. I think Stanford, I don't know what they all are, but there's really interesting information out there. But I'm not sure if learning about it works. I think you have to approach it in a subjective way, actually, like through the internal experience instead of understanding it as a whatever. But it is very interesting stuff, for sure. One thing that's interesting, you heard of TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. Okay, so they can put this apparatus on your head, and they've got it so that it causes a magnetic stimulation, and you know there's a connection between magnetism and electricity. They can literally turn on and off different centers on your cerebral cortex, and they have it tuned so they can pick very specific ones, like on your motor strip, which is what causes movement. They can actually cause like your finger to move because they can localize it that much, and they use this for different like studies and so forth. I read that they've actually found a way to use it to like turn off the default mode network, and people have mystical experiences. Like they experience like infinity just when they turn off their default mode network with the TMS machine. So who knows, maybe someday we don't have to practice. You just go and get your TMS treatments, you know, a few days a week, and sooner or later you're enlightened. I don't know if it'll really work like that, but why not? So that's pretty cool. Oh, so here's another thing that I thought of touching on somewhere in that talk. And that is, it's important to have a measure of caution that we don't take the movement of self-abandonment that we learned at a very young age and drag it into our spirituality. What I mean by self-abandonment is something very simple. That is that at some point very young, we start learning that what you're feeling, thinking, or experiencing is incorrect. That's not the right one. That's not the right experience, not the right thought, not the right feeling or emotion. We learn this. Now, I don't think anyone's evil out there that does this to us. Even I think if you have really good parenting, it's going to happen, right? If you have really dysfunctional parenting, it's going to happen a lot more and a lot sooner, probably, whatever. But I think it happens to all of us. And I think it's just a side effect of growing up, learning how to be a functional adult in the setting of having this incredibly complex consciousness that is self-conscious with this fully developed, overdeveloped, maybe frontal cortex. So I think there's no guilty party of how this occurs, but I think it occurs in all of us to some degree, and some of us to a larger degree. And that is, we second guess ourselves all the time. This, that's not the right feeling, that's not the right emotion, that's not the right thought. In fact, I would say that's what self is made out of. Self is made out of some kind of instantaneous, or not instantaneous, but fine-tuned avoidance pattern inside of thought. Because when you stop avoiding thought, when for whatever reason, however it happens, attention turns toward thought, and there's just pure thought, pure consciousness, there's none of that feeling of avoidance. It's actually a reasonably neutral experience. It's not like you're jumping through the roof with bliss or anything, but it feels very, it feels like a huge relief because there's no avoidance going on anymore. Now, when that happens and how that happens for you, is anyone's guess. But it's very clear when that stops. And then the moment we start thinking again, the moment we become an internal self and start solving problems of our life and whatever we're doing on a moment-to-moment basis, a little bit of that avoidance is going again. I think it's actually how you learn to be a self. You learn to be a self by avoiding certain instincts and then developing other instincts, right? But when we go to practice, when we go to sit, if we're doing natural meditation or shikantaza, basic meditation, or mantra meditation maybe, or inquiry, it's not necessary to do that. That avoidance, we don't have to do it at all anymore. We don't have to second guess our experience. That's the beauty of it. And yet we do, right? We'll sit there and be meditating and think, you might have some certain experiential insight maybe. And then something will go, no, that's probably not right because I remember so-and-so, he said it this way. And then you're comparing, it's not quite like that, right? That's what I mean is this, the self-avoidance, the self-abandonment is really sneaky. It's kind of insidious actually. So just have a little caution about that it can happen, and being aware that it can happen, and being willing to see it when it happens and look at the mechanism of it and just kind of catch yourself and go, oh, am I invalidating this immediate experience? And what happens when I don't do that? What happens when I stop doing that right now and I just admit or I just posit that this immediate experience is the right one, and then stop the internal debate, see what happens. That's what I mean by following your intuition in all the way. Because then the experiencer split stops. You ever wondered what a watcher is? A watcher state, a manager state, the doubter, the self-doubter? What is that? Like, what is that actually mechanically and experientially in the brain? What's going on? And again, I think it's how we learn to be an internal self. It's a little bit of an avoidance of thought. We have to avoid a thought in a way. We have to distance ourselves from thoughts experientially in consciousness to evaluate a thought. And then by the time we learn to do that, we forget that it's thoughts we're evaluating. We think it's reality. We think it's actually the world. When we're thinking about, I'm going to see my partner in 5 minutes and here's the conversation we're going to have, right? Because you're sure it's going to go like that because it always does, right? You're thinking about that. You actually think that's your partner and you think it's you thinking it, right? It really feels real, but it's not. It's just a pattern of separation, avoidance of a certain thought, holding a distance, a suspicious distance at a certain thought so you can evaluate it. And then another one, and then another one, and then another one. It's that standing wave in consciousness that I talk about. That's what I mean by, really, it's actually self-abandonment, because when you collapse that wave, when you stop evaluating thoughts and you just come in contact with thoughts, when the me that seems like it's doing the thinking and the thought that it seems like is being thought are physically experienced to be the same thing, then many people call that the sense of I, or I am. So you're getting closer to yourself. That's when you're not self-abandoning anymore. You're just like, oh, pure self, pure subjectivity, pure being, pure I, pure awake, with not holding on to any thought or concept. And importantly, you're open to any formation of thought and concept, because if you're open to it, then you don't have to hold the distance, and you won't evaluate it as an object, if that makes sense. It's more like just contact, infinite. Might feel like reflection in every direction. Might just feel like oceanic. So just be a little alert of, wow, am I even using spiritual practice to abandon myself? Right? Yeah. Any other questions? We'll probably have a retreat in January, and I'll send it out. It'll be online retreat like we did in July. And I'll just send out like the schedule that we'll be following here, and probably do 2 or 3 per day, 2 or 3 talk. One will be like a guided meditation in the morning, then a talk, and then a question and answer is what we did in July. So might do that for like 5 days in January if anyone wants to come. You can come to one part of it or whatever, all of it. And we had a mini retreat here the last couple of days, so I put a couple of audios on the website. Simply Always Awake. There's a couple of new ones there. Thank you all for coming. It's good to see you. Happy Sunday. See you guys.
Thanks, Angela.
You're welcome. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bye, Angelo.
Bye.
See ya.